I found the brochure tucked behind a bottle of Tylenol in my kitchen cabinet. Bright Horizons Luxury Senior Living. My name was already filled in. So was the down payment. Jason didn't even have the decency to hide it well. That night I sat at the window of the house I built a life in, watching the backyard sway in the breeze. They thought I'd be grateful. They thought I'd go quietly. Before we get into the story behind this, if you believe in justice and second chances, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. And let me know where you're watching from in the comments. My name is Linda, and I am 61 years old. For 3 decades, I was the glue that held my family together. Not the kind of glue you notice, the kind that quietly keeps the cracks from showing. I was the one who remembered everyone's birthdays, who set the Thanksgiving table just the way my late husband liked it, who welcomed my sons' wives with open arms, even when their smiles were strained and their eyes scanned the room for flaws. After Paul died, the silence in this house became my closest companion. I didn't mind. I had my garden, my puzzles, and the Sunday dinners when Jason and Tyler would come with their wives and kids. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. It was family. The house had become more than a home. It was our family's anchor, a white colonial just outside Asheville, North Carolina. Wraparound porch, creaky screen door azaleas in the spring. The kind of place you see on postcards or in the hazy corners of memory when you think about home. But that's the funny thing about memory. It softens betrayal until it cuts through you like glass. I started to notice small things first. Jason's wife, Britt, whispering to the kids when I wasn't looking. Tyler excusing himself from conversations about the house. And then one afternoon while I was folding laundry, I overheard Jason on the phone in the hallway. "Once she's moved in, we'll have it listed by the end of the month." It was like ice water down my back. I stood there holding one of Paul's old flannel shirts and realized my sons, the same boys I stayed up with through croup and college applications, were planning to erase me. And yet they didn't know everything. They didn't know that the little patch of land next door, the one they'd dismissed as just woods, was now worth more than all their fancy condos combined. Because I hadn't just been surviving, I had been preparing. For years I stayed quiet, loyal, predictable, but not anymore. This is the story of how I chose not to be forgotten, and how I taught my sons a lesson they'll never forget. There's a rhythm to loneliness that no one warns you about. Mornings become rituals, 1 cup of black coffee brewed at 6:30 sharp, a single fried egg on toast, the sound of the local AM radio station whispering farm reports and oldies into an empty kitchen. After Paul passed, I found solace in the mundane. I planted tomatoes along the east fence. I labeled spice jars. I recaulked the bathtub, just to feel useful. There's something oddly grounding about doing the kind of work that doesn't talk back. The house was quiet, but it breathed with memory. The floorboard outside the master bedroom still creaked the way it had for 40 years. The hall closet still smelled faintly of Old Spice and cedar. I left Paul's flannel robe hanging behind the door. I told myself it was so I wouldn't forget, but the truth was, I didn't want to admit I was the only one left. Sundays were the best. Jason would pull into the driveway in his Tesla, always 10 minutes late, and Tyler would arrive soon after in his Ford Explorer, kids tumbling out already barefoot in the grass before their mothers could scold them. I'd cook a pot roast or lasagna depending on the season. The dining room would fill with clatter and noise and the faint smell of whatever perfume Britt was wearing that week. I lived for those days. I convinced myself they came for me. But looking back, I see now they came for the house. They came for the illusion, the swing in the backyard, the framed photos still on the mantel, the taste of a childhood that someone else had kept alive. They were building lives of their own condos, in Charlotte business trips to Denver, vacation plans, to Turks and Caicos. I didn't resent it. Not then. I was proud. I had done what mothers are meant to do. I gave them a good start and stayed behind. But still, some part of me waited for a real hug. For a moment that wasn't about convenience. For a conversation that started with, "How are you really?" Instead, they gave me compliments like, "You're so independent, Mom," which I now understand was code for, "We don't think about you unless we have to." And then one Sunday, while wiping crumbs off the dining table, I found a note in Tyler's handwriting, "Remind Jason, get appraisal estimate." That was the first ripple, just a ripple. But ripples have a way of growing into waves. It started with Britt. She was standing in my kitchen, one hand curled around a glass of Pinot Grigio, the other resting on the granite countertop Paul had installed himself in 1992. Her tone was casual, but her eyes were scanning, taking inventory. "This place has such character," she said, drawing out the last word like it had thorns. "But don't you ever feel like it's too much house for just you?" I laughed it off the way women my age are trained to do. A soft chuckle, a vague shrug. "I like the space," I said. "It breathes." She smiled tight, practiced, and looked toward the living room where Jason was helping himself to more scotch. "I mean, if it were me, I'd be worried about stairs and bathtubs. Safety, you know." That night, I didn't sleep well. I tried to tell myself she meant well, that Britt was just being Britt. But something in her tone lingered like perfume after the wearer's long gone. Then came the suggestion, no the insistence on a family group chat. "Let's all stay in touch better," Tyler had said, as though Sunday dinners and holiday meals weren't already enough. I was thrilled at first, but it soon turned into something else entirely. Links to articles about downsizing in your 60s, tips for organizing your estate, a video about the benefits of independent living communities. They weren't subtle, but they were strategic. And when I didn't respond, Jason would text separately. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. You ever think about what you want for the future?" I always replied with something light. "I want to see the grandkids grow up," or "just hoping for good tomatoes this summer." But I could feel the walls shifting. I started noticing how quickly they left after dinner, how Jason never offered to fix the screen door anymore, how Tyler would step outside to take calls only to come back in with that rehearsed smile. No one asked if I needed anything. They weren't offering help. They were looking for a way out. And deep down, I think they already believed I wouldn't fight it. It was subtle at first. Jason started offering to handle the mail, said he didn't want me stressing over bills or paperwork. "You've done enough for everyone already, Mom," he'd say, flashing that smile of his reassuring empty. Then things started disappearing. My bank statements, a property tax letter, even the renewal notice for the land insurance on the wooded lot next door. When I asked, he shrugged. "Must have been lost. These old mailboxes aren't reliable." Tyler began doing this thing, gently correcting me. If I mentioned we planted the azaleas in 1994, he'd smile and say, "No, Mom. That was 97. You're just mixing it up." Once I walked into the pantry and found Britt rearranging the shelves. "I just thought it might be easier for you if the heavier cans were lower," she said. "Easier, safer, more manageable." The words changed, but the implication didn't. One night after a Sunday dinner, I overheard them in the driveway. "She's getting more forgetful," Britt whispered. "Last week she called me Elaine." "I know," Jason sighed. "It's time. Time for what?" The next week, Jason brought me a packet. He called it "Just a Little Information" about senior communities. Spa services, gourmet meals, lecture series. It looked more like a resort brochure than a care facility. "You deserve this kind of comfort, Mom." I pushed it back toward him. "I'm not a piece of furniture to be relocated, Jason." He looked wounded, but I saw the flicker of something else in his eyes. Annoyance. "You're being emotional," he said. That was the moment I realized they were trying to rewrite my story in real time. Not because they believed I couldn't manage, but because it was easier for them if I didn't. From then on, everything I said was overthinking. Every memory I shared was maybe a little fuzzy. And every time I stood my ground, I was getting worked up. It was like watching my reflection fade slowly from a mirror they controlled. And for the first time, I wondered if they ever truly saw me at all. It was a Wednesday when Jason called to say he'd scheduled a tour for us. "Just come look," he said. "No pressure. It'll give you peace of mind." I didn't want to go, but he showed up at my door with Britt and a box of donuts like it was a family picnic. Tyler was conveniently stuck at work. The facility was called Bright Horizons. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a koi pond, a library that smelled of vanilla-scented air freshener, and new carpet. Everyone wore beige. "Isn't it lovely?" Britt gushed, taking my arm like she was doing me a favor. "You could have your own little apartment. No stairs, no stress. Just ease." The staff smiled too wide. The rooms were too quiet. Jason had already spoken to the director. My name was on a file. The unit they wanted me to see, already on hold. "We just want what's best," he said again, that phrase now hollow from repetition. I didn't say much during the tour, but I saw the way Britt walked a step ahead, opening doors like she already owned them. I saw the satisfaction in Jason's eyes when the paperwork was laid on the table like this had all been one long business negotiation. And then days later, I found the brochure. Tucked in the back of my kitchen cabinet, behind the Tylenol. My name already filled out. A down payment processed from Jason's business account. No signature, no conversation. Just a decision made for me in whispers and winks. That night, I didn't cry. I sat at the kitchen table with the brochure in front of me untouched. I listened to the wind rustle through the backyard swing Paul had hung for the boys when they were little. I thought of every birthday I had remembered, every fever I had soothed, every late night I stayed awake praying they'd come home safe. And I felt something new. Not anger, clarity. They weren't just pushing me aside. They were erasing me, and I wasn't going to let them. It happened on a Sunday? Of course it did. The kids were running through the hallway, sticky with grape juice and barefoot like always. I had just pulled a peach cobbler from the oven when Jason stood and clinked his fork against a wine glass. "We have an announcement," he said, smiling toward Britt. My hands were still in oven mitts. Jason cleared his throat. "After talking it through with Tyler, we've decided it's time to move forward with selling the house." Silence. Then a ripple of polite surprise from the wives. One of the kids dropped a spoon. "Excuse me," I said, setting the cobbler down. My voice was calm, but I could feel my knees go loose. Jason nodded as if I'd just confirmed his point. "We've already contacted a realtor. The market's hot, Mom. It would be irresponsible not to act now." Britt chimed in. "You'll be so much more comfortable once you're settled. We've even picked a unit with a porch you love. Porches, remember?" No one met my eyes, not even Tyler. He was staring at his plate, pushing peas around like a child caught lying. I waited for one of them to say it was a joke, that it was up for discussion, that I had a say. But they moved on to dessert, like I was furniture in a room they'd already emptied in their minds. Later that night, I found the listing photos already taken. My bedroom, my kitchen, even the worn rocking chair on the porch. It was already in motion. I wasn't even needed to pack. And that more than anything was the cruelty. Not that they wanted me gone, but that they believed I had nowhere else to go. The morning after their announcement, the house felt unfamiliar. I walked barefoot across the kitchen tiles, still warm from yesterday's oven heat. And it struck me everything around me had become a memory in progress. The photos on the wall, the dishes drying in the rack, even the half-burnt candle on the windowsill, they all felt like part of a life already packed away. I didn't confront them. I didn't scream, didn't demand answers. Something colder had settled inside me. Instead, I made coffee. I drank it slowly on the porch, wrapped in Paul's robe, while the swing creaked beside me like it was morning too. They thought I'd argue, thought I'd cling. I didn't. I watched them load their car's cooler's leftover cobbler, a centerpiece Britt just adored. Jason hugged me with one arm, eyes scanning his phone. Tyler mumbled something about a meeting. Not once did they ask how I felt. That week they didn't call, didn't check in, not even a text. As if by initiating the sale, they had already begun the process of forgetting me. I called my lawyer, a kind man named Raymond, whose office smelled like leather and lemon polish. We'd worked together when Paul and I updated the will after his heart attack. Raymond remembered everything. He also remembered the letter. "Your husband left instructions," he said, sliding the envelope across his desk. "You never opened it." I stared at my name in Paul's handwriting. "No," I whispered. "Linda." That land next door, the wooded acre? I nodded. It's not just an asset. It's protected under a special trust. You're the sole trustee until you decide otherwise. And more importantly, Paul stipulated you have final authority over any sale of family property, including this house, until both sons are over 40. My breath caught. They can't sell the house. He shook his head. Not without your signature. I held the letter in my hands for a long time. Then I smiled, not because I wanted revenge, but because for the first time in weeks I felt the ground beneath me again. After Paul died, time unraveled differently. The funeral had been full of flowers, full of casseroles, full of people saying things like, "He was a good man," and "At least he didn't suffer." No one asked me how I was sleeping. The house became cavernous. At night I could hear it breathing in the silence, the groan of wood settling, the soft hum of the fridge, the ache of a chair no longer pulled out on the left side of the table. I'd reach for 2 coffee mugs out of habit, then freeze. Sometimes I set his out anyway, let it sit there full and untouched like a symbol, or a prayer. Jason and Tyler came by often at first, checking in, helping with bills. Britt brought lasagna. Tyler fixed a flickering porch light. But slowly, those visits tapered off. The calls got shorter. Then came the excuses, soccer practice, business trips. The kids have the flu. Eventually, they stopped offering reasons at all. I didn't blame them. Not then. They had lives. They had wives. They had every right to move forward. I was the one who didn't know how. I tried joining a widows group at the Methodist church, but every story sounded the same. We were married 50 years. We still held hands at the breakfast table. Paul and I hadn't made it that far. He died 3 months after our 31st anniversary. Sudden heart failure. He went to the garage to check the sprinklers, never came back in. I found him on the concrete floor, the sprinkler manual still in his hand. That image, it stayed with me. Paul wasn't afraid of death, but I think he was afraid of leaving things undone, and now I understood why. There were days I didn't leave the house, days I didn't speak to another soul. I clipped coupons I didn't use, cleaned floors already spotless, rearranged the spice rack 3 times just to hear something click into place. Grief makes the world too loud one minute and too quiet the next. But worst of all, it makes you forget what you sound like when you're not apologizing for existing. I lived in that silence for 2 years, long enough to disappear in plain sight. I was 28 when Jason was born. Paul and I were still living in a 1-bedroom duplex behind a gas station. We had 1 car, a used Buick that rattled in reverse, and a coffee table made of stacked milk crates. We didn't have much, but we had plans. I gave up my job as a bank teller the moment Jason came home. It wasn't a conversation, it was a decision. Paul was working construction, and I knew someone had to be there for the late-night fevers and preschool drop-offs, so I stayed home. Then came Tyler 2 years later. Sweet, quiet Tyler, who hated loud noises and carried a threadbare elephant plush everywhere for 4 straight years. Our lives were built around coupons, crock-pots, and Goodwill clearance days. I learned how to stretch ground beef into 3 meals, how to make hand-me-downs look new, how to smile through PTA meetings even when I hadn't slept. I remember one winter when Paul got laid off for 3 months. We kept the heat low, bundled the boys in double socks, and I started sewing quilts by hand to sell at the farmer's market. $50 here, $30 there, enough to keep the lights on. I didn't feel sorry for myself. I felt purposeful. Raising those boys became my compass. I read parenting books from the library, practiced phonics at the dinner table. I packed their lunches with handwritten notes, even when we were down to peanut butter and saltines. There was a Christmas when all I could afford was a pair of sketchbooks and some dollar store crayons. Jason cried when he opened his. I wanted the space Lego set. Paul started to speak, but I stopped him. It's okay, I said, holding back tears. He's just tired. But I wasn't okay. That night I sat in the laundry room folding clothes, wondering if love was enough when the world kept demanding more. Even then I didn't regret the sacrifices. What hurt wasn't what I gave. It's that somewhere along the way, they stopped remembering I gave it all. I was 39 when the acceptance letter came for Jason. Duke University, full tuition but room and board still needed covering. Jason ran through the house waving the envelope like a golden ticket, shouting, "I got in! I got in!" Paul hugged him hard, then looked at me. We didn't need words. We both knew what it meant. The savings account we had built over years for our first real vacation, for the little cabin we dreamed of retiring to, was gone in a week. But it still wasn't enough. We didn't qualify for much aid. We made just above the cutoff. Paul offered to take a night shift at the mill. I said no. Instead, I sold my mother's wedding ring. It had been passed down for 3 generations. Rose gold, tiny emerald chips set around a weathered diamond. I wore it on a chain close to my heart. I hadn't taken it off since the day she passed. I stood in the parking lot of McPherson's Jewelry and Loans for 10 minutes before walking in. The clerk barely looked at me when he said, "We don't get much for emeralds." I nodded, fingers trembling, as I unclasped the chain. It covered Jason's freshman housing deposit. Just barely. I told him it was a scholarship adjustment. When he graduated 4 years later with honors in a tailored suit I couldn't afford to attend the ceremony for, I mailed him a card with $100 and a note, "For the next chapter, love, Mom." He texted back a thumbs-up emoji. That was it. I didn't cry. I just sat in the kitchen and held the space where that necklace used to lie against my skin. It wasn't the money. It was the memory I gave up to build someone else's future. A future that somehow didn't include looking back. I have to pause here. Personally, I believe this is the exact moment where unconditional love became blind enablement. Do you agree with me if you do comment with a 1? If you think the protagonist had no other choice, comment with a 2. The body remembers what the heart tries to forget. After Jason left for college, the house seemed to exhale. The noise was gone, so was the urgency, but so too was the sense of purpose. I filled the space with busyness, volunteered at the library, took up quilting, joined a book club full of women who discussed fiction but rarely touched their own truths. I smiled, I participated, but I always felt like an echo in someone else's life. Paul was still working long hours, and Tyler was entering high school, quiet and distant, lost in his own world of guitar strings and unfinished sketches. One evening, I found an old birthday card in a shoebox. Jason had drawn a rocket ship with the words, "To the best mom in the universe." He was 7. I held it for a long time, wondering when the boy who drew that became the man who sent back emojis. My back began to ache. Subtle at first, then louder. The kind of pain that makes you wince when folding laundry or reaching for the top shelf. I ignored it. There was always something more urgent: groceries, oil changes, parent-teacher meetings. Then one morning I blacked out while sweeping the porch. Paul rushed me to the ER. Bulging discs, stress-induced fatigue. Nothing surgical yet, the doctor said. But you need to slow down. Slow down. I wanted to laugh. I had never allowed myself to move fast in the first place. We couldn't afford physical therapy. So I managed. Heating pads, ibuprofen, quiet sobs in the bathtub when the house was asleep. But the pain changed me. I stopped gardening. I stopped baking. And in those quiet absences, a distance began to form between Paul and me, not out of resentment, but resignation. He didn't know how to help. I didn't know how to ask. I became invisible. Not because anyone meant to forget me, but because I trained them to think I didn't need remembering. It started with a tree. A storm had swept through the neighborhood one night in late spring. Lightning like cracks in the sky, thunder that rattled window panes. When I woke the next morning, the old sycamore at the edge of our property had split clean down the middle. Half of it had fallen into our yard. The other half rested on the land next door, the overgrown acre. I never touched the one Paul always called our little buffer. That tree had stood longer than our marriage, maybe longer than me. I stared at it from the kitchen window while my coffee went cold. Most people would have called a service. Let someone else handle it. Instead, I opened the shed. The axe hadn't been used in years, but the handle still fit in my hands like it remembered me. I dragged a tarp out, pulled on gloves, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I did something no one asked of me, something that had no reward, something purely mine. It took all morning. Sweat dripping down my back, arms, trembling knees threatening to give. But each swing cut deeper than wood. Each crack of bark was a sound I hadn't realized I'd missed. When I finished, I stood in the clearing, covered in sap and dirt and pain, and I smiled. That night, I slept through the entire night for the first time in a year. The next morning, I walked the perimeter of that acre. I noticed things I hadn't seen in decades: the slope of the ground, the way the morning sun hit its eastern edge, the faint glimmer of a dried-up stream bed. And then I remembered something Paul once said while painting the fence. "Someday, that land'll be worth more than the house. Just you wait." Back then, it felt like a joke. Now it felt like a seed. Something had cracked open in me with that tree. A quiet rebellion. A whisper that said you are still here. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to be seen again. The land stayed with me. After clearing the fallen tree, I began walking the acre daily. Just 15 minutes at first, then longer. I brought a notebook, drew sketches, marked where sunlight hit strongest, noticed how the soil changed with the seasons. Jason and Tyler never asked what I was doing. They assumed I was gardening again. Let them think that. I started reading. Zoning laws, development trends, county records. I learned about parcels, water rights, real estate trusts. I downloaded PDFs I barely understood at first, highlighted, annotated, asked questions. At the public library, an older gentleman named Carl, retired surveyor, widower, Vietnam vet, started sitting with me. He helped me read plats and maps, showed me how to file for independent assessment. We never talked about my sons. We didn't need to. He understood silence the way only someone who's lost can. One day, while sipping weak library coffee, Carl pointed to the eastern boundary of the lot. "You realize if the city pushes the Greenway extension next year like they plan, your little acre becomes a front row seat," he said. My heart paused. Front row seat to what? "Demand," he said. "Developers would kill for a slice of that, and if it's still in your name outright, well, Linda, you might be sitting on gold." That night I walked the edge of the land barefoot. The air was cool. My knees ached. But I felt taller than I had in years, not because I wanted revenge, but because I was done being overlooked. They had built lives on the back of my sacrifices, and now they believed I was disposable, but they'd forgotten who held the real foundation. I stood beneath the stars, fingers curled around a branch like a promise, and made a vow I didn't say out loud: I will not be erased. Not by my sons, not by their convenience, not by the world that taught me to disappear. I was still here, and they were about to remember it. The official appraisal came in a manila envelope marked confidential. Carl had put me in touch with a local assessor. He trusted, an independent appraiser with no ties to the city council or development firms. Her name was Trina. She wore hiking boots and carried a tape measure like it was a sword. She spent 3 hours on the acre walking it edge to edge, took soil samples, photographed runoff, asked questions no one had ever bothered to ask me. When she handed me the report 2 weeks later, her face was unreadable. "I hope you're sitting down," she said. The land, once valued at $22,000 when Paul bought it, was now worth close to $900,000. My breath caught. Why, I asked. 2 reasons, she said. 1, zoning changes. The city wants to push mixed-use development along the corridor east of the Greenway. 2, scarcity. This is the last undeveloped lot of its size within 6 blocks. You're holding the final puzzle piece. Puzzle piece. I stared at the number on the page, then back at the window. Jason and Tyler had no idea. They'd dismissed the acre as a nuisance, a patch of just woods. But this wasn't just land anymore. It was leverage. And more than that, it was mine. Paul had left it in my name for a reason. He'd seen something I hadn't. And now for the first time, I wasn't thinking like a mother. I was thinking like a steward. I made 3 calls that week. One to Raymond, my lawyer. One to Trina, asking for a notarized summary. And one to a woman named Georgia Marks, a retired land use attorney who taught free workshops at the rec center. I didn't tell anyone. Not Jason, not Tyler, not even Carl. Because this wasn't about rage. This was about reclamation. I wasn't plotting revenge. I was building the foundation for the day they'd come knocking, and I would finally be the one holding the door. The first thing I did was separate the mailbox key from the house key. I opened a new P.O. box under my maiden name. Small detail, but it felt like slipping into a pair of shoes I hadn't worn in decades, strange but sturdy. Next came the trust documents. Raymond and Georgia walked me through the process of reinforcing the land's protections. We moved the wooded acre and the family home under an umbrella trust with me as the primary and irrevocable trustee. The phrasing was airtight. Any transfer, lease, or sale of the protected assets requires the signed approval of the trustee and affirmation of independent financial counsel. Translation: Jason and Tyler couldn't touch a blade of grass without my say-so. I filed everything quietly. Raymond offered to send certified copies to the county. I asked him to hold off. Why, he asked, because when they find out I said I want to see their faces. Meanwhile, I returned every call from the real estate agent Jason had lined up. Polite, warm, interested. I let her think I was considering the offer. I asked all the right questions. I even staged the living room for photos. Jason praised me in the group chat. Mom's finally coming around. Britt sent heart emojis. I smiled. I let them believe it. But behind the scenes, Georgia helped me draft a letter of intent for conditional sale if and only if both sons demonstrated sustained co-residency with me for 12 months, in the same house, as caregivers. It was never meant to be signed. It was meant to exist, because paper is a weapon when sharpened by law. And silence, true silence, isn't surrender. It's preparation. I wasn't staging a rebellion. I was building a fortress, brick by brick, clause by clause, and they hadn't even noticed the drawbridge going up. The first crack appeared in Jason's voice. He called on a Tuesday evening, his usual "Hey, Mom," laced with something less polished. So, where are we with the listing? The agent says you've been stalling. I'm just making sure everything's in order, I said lightly. It's a big decision. There was a pause. You already agreed. I said I was open to the idea. That's not the same as consent. Another pause. Longer. We've already told people. About the sale. I stirred my tea. Well then, I hope you didn't promise too much. By the end of the week, Tyler showed up. Alone. No wife, no kids. Just him on the porch with a six-pack and a nervous smile. I figured we could talk, he said. I let him in. He sat at the kitchen table like a stranger. Noticed things. My folders. My open laptop. The legal pads. What's all this? He asked. Just some research. He nodded slowly. Mom, you're not making this harder than it needs to be, right? I looked him straight in the eye. Do you think I'm being difficult? He fidgeted. No, it's just... Jason says you're acting... different. I am. He didn't know what to do with that. They started texting more frequently after that. Questions disguised as concern. Requests hidden in casual chatter. Just checking in. Let us know if you need help going through things. Want us to stop by and clear the garage. I said no, every time. And slowly I felt the fog gathering around them, not panic, not yet, but uncertainty. The creeping feeling that the rules had changed and they were the last to know. The agent stopped calling. Britt texted me a passive-aggressive meme about the joys of letting go. Jason's tone shifted from sweet to sharp in a matter of days. You're being selfish. No, I was being seen. For the first time in years, they were starting to notice me, not the image of the agreeable mother they had grown accustomed to, but the woman beneath. And the truth was this: the more they pressed, the firmer I became. Because nothing strengthens resolve like realizing your absence would cost them more than your presence ever did. Jason prided himself on being a planner. Everything in his life was color-coded: his calendar, his closet, even the way he arranged his children's extracurriculars. Britt once joked that Jason scheduled affection the way others scheduled dentist appointments. So when things stopped going according to plan, cracks formed faster than he could plaster them. He tried subtle pressure first. "Mom, we've already put in an offer on a second property. This sale is part of that timeline." I said nothing. He escalated. "You're jeopardizing our family's financial stability." I offered him pie. Then came the guilt. "Tyler and I are just trying to do what's best. For everyone." "Why are you making us feel like villains?" I set the table and hummed an old hymn. He didn't like that. 2 days later, Britt called. She didn't bother with sugar. "Jason's unraveling," she said. "He's stressed. His partners are asking questions. This whole thing was supposed to be seamless." "I didn't realize I was a transaction," I replied. "You know that's not what I meant." But it was, because somewhere along the line, they'd stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as an obstacle. Jason showed up that Sunday with a printed spreadsheet. "Let me show you the numbers," he said. "If we close by end of quarter, everyone wins. You'll be more comfortable, and we free up equity." "It's smart, Mom." I looked at the paper, then looked at him, and asked, "Why didn't you include me in the planning before you made promises?" He blinked, because it had never occurred to him. That was the moment his confidence faltered. Just a flicker. But I saw it. And behind that flicker, fear. Not that I'd say no, but that I already had. A house of cards doesn't fall all at once. It sways, it shifts, it tilts just enough to feel the breeze. And Jason, my meticulous, ambitious son, had just felt the first gust, and he didn't have a hand free to catch it. The idea came while I was pruning the hydrangeas. Their roots had gone shallow, sprawling, beautiful above ground, but fragile underneath. I trimmed gently, then dug deeper, giving them fresh compost, darker soil, rich with nutrients they hadn't had in years. It made me think about everything I'd left untouched in my own life. So I dug there too. I found the deed to the acre. I found the old ledger where Paul had scribbled figures in pencil, calculating what he called someday dreams. Cabin costs, RV prices, a line item marked Linda's Fund. I stared at that page for a long time. Then I started making calls. Not to lawyers, not to family, to women. Carolyn, my friend from church, whose daughter just got her real estate license. Marisol, the retired architect who lived 2 streets over and always offered me rosemary from her garden. And Claire, the widow who ran the local antique shop and once mentioned she had a brother in zoning. I didn't ask for favors. I asked for coffee. And I listened. These weren't power players. They were women like me, overlooked, underestimated, but sharp as glass when you stopped talking long enough to hear them. Together, we mapped possibilities. What if the acre became a private garden space? What if we leased it seasonally to the city for community events? What if we sold access rights to developers without ever giving up the land? Every option came with paperwork, boundaries, clauses I could enforce. And every option came with one unshakable truth. This wasn't just real estate, it was reinvention. For so long, I had treated my life as something already lived. But this land, this overlooked, dismissed patch of green, it still had seasons left. So did I. And while Jason played chess with spreadsheets, I was planting new roots in new soil, the kind that wouldn't blow over in the next storm. Britt was the first to break character. She called during a PTA fundraiser, voice pinched and rushed. "Linda, I need to know where things stand." Jason's boss asked about the equity shift from the house. He looked like a fool. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, "but I'm not in the business of preserving reputations I wasn't invited to build." Silence. Then sharp, "This isn't a game." "No," I said, "it's a boundary." Jason followed up 2 days later, dressed sharply, arriving unannounced. He stood on the porch like he still owned it. "I think we need to reset the tone." He began placing a folder on the table. Inside, new listing forms, pre-signed documents, financial projections. "I've drafted a new agreement," he said. You'll have full access to a care suite at any facility you choose. Private nurse, social calendar, everything. It's a win-win." He smiled like he was doing me a favor. I didn't touch the folder. Instead, I handed him a printed page, a notarized summary of the revised trust. His face twitched. This wasn't part of the plan. "No," I said. "But that's the thing about growing up, Jason. You don't get to make all the plans anymore." For the first time, he didn't have a comeback, just that tight little nod he gives when trying to stay composed. Later that night, Tyler called. "Jason's losing it," he said quietly. "You really pulled the rug out from under him." "No," I replied. I just reminded him it was never his rug. The pretense began to dissolve. Britt stopped texting. Jason's tone in the family group chat grew colder. Tyler went silent. Holiday plans were still undecided. The kids were really busy this fall. I'd been cut out of the social script, but I felt no grief. Because what they withheld was no longer what I needed. They were scrambling to protect a version of control that no longer existed. And I finally was living in a truth that no longer needed their permission. The last Sunday dinner came and went with no guests. I set the table anyway, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, the good plates. It wasn't hope I wasn't waiting. It was closure. They didn't show, not even a text. I poured myself a glass of wine and ate alone, listening to the wind move through the chimes Paul had hung the year we bought the house. The silence didn't ache anymore. It simply existed. The next morning, I called Raymond. "Let's record everything I said. Transfer notices, county filings, trustee addendums." He didn't ask why. He just said, "It's time." "Yes." That afternoon, I went to the courthouse. The clerk stamped each page without looking up. Bureaucracy is the most underrated armor. Then I made one final visit to the real estate agent Jason had enlisted. I asked to speak privately. We sat in her office, a small glass cube filled with brochures and business cards that reeked of desperation. "I wanted to thank you," I said. For what she asked, confused. "For showing me how much this house is actually worth." She blinked. I handed her a copy of the trust documents. "This property is not available," I said, "and it never was." She opened the folder. "Read." Her face paled. "I assume Jason didn't tell you that part." She shook her head. I stood. "You might want to find other listings." That night, I burned the pre-signed contracts Jason had left behind. One by one, they curled and crumbled in the fire pit Paul built with his bare hands. Each page a symbol, each flame a memory I no longer owed to anyone. The phone didn't ring. No one came to knock. And still, I didn't waver. There's a moment in every mother's life when she realizes her children are not coming to save her, that they were never meant to. And if she's lucky, really lucky, she realizes she never needed saving to begin with. I had crossed the point of no return. And for the first time, I didn't look back. It began with a phone call I didn't answer. Jason left a voicemail, short-clipped, carefully measured. "Mom, we need to talk. Something's come up with the financing. Call me." I didn't. 2 days later, I received an email from the agent, polite but strained. She'd been contacted by a legal team regarding a misrepresentation in a pending sale. She asked if I had filed anything recently. I replied with a copy of the trust. Her response was one line, "Understood. I'll remove the listing." The first domino had fallen. I imagined the conversation that followed, Jason pacing Britt, typing furiously, Tyler watching silently from the corner. They had built an entire financial scenario on the assumption of my compliance. And now the foundation had vanished. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I baked bread. I swept the porch. And I waited. Britt cracked first. She showed up on a Thursday, no appointment, no children in tow. Her eyes were red. Her voice trembled with a fury she was trying to disguise as concern. "You've humiliated us," she hissed. "I've preserved what's mine," I said. "This house was supposed to fund our next move." "No," I corrected. "It was supposed to fund my end. You just hoped I wouldn't notice." She slapped the envelope she'd brought onto the counter. Inside, an alternative offer. A smaller unit, a monthly stipend, full visitation rights. I slid it back. "Tell Jason I said the price of not asking is higher than he ever imagined." She left without another word. That night I sat outside and listened to the frogs by the creek. The breeze was gentle. The swing creaked softly. One domino had fallen, but I knew the rest were already trembling, because power once reclaimed echoes. And in the quiet that follows, those who built their castles on your silence start hearing the cracks, whether they admit it or not. Jason's voice changed first. Not the words, those remained clipped managerial, but the rhythm. Gone was the effortless cadence of a man in control. He started calling at odd hours, leaving fragmented messages, hesitating between sentences. I listened. I never responded. Then came the email from Raymond, FYI. "There's a title discrepancy under investigation. County flagged an attempted transfer that contradicts trustee records. Jason's firm is named on the draft, just a heads up." I read it twice. 3 days later, Tyler showed up. He hadn't shaved. He didn't ask to come in. He just leaned on the porch railing like a boy who forgot his lines in a school play. "Jason's getting audited," he said quietly. "Not just the sale. His firm. His partners are pissed. This whole thing has turned radioactive." I offered him a seat. He shook his head. "I told him not to rush it," he mumbled. "I told him you wouldn't roll over." It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest thing I'd heard in years. "Why didn't you stop him?" I asked. He sighed. "Because it was easier to let him carry the plan. He always does. That's the thing about enablers. They think silence is innocence." By the end of the month, I started hearing things from neighbors. Jason had listed a second property, then pulled it. His wife canceled 2 charity board meetings. The private school his kids attended sent a tuition reminder that somehow leaked to the local Facebook group. No scandal, no headlines, just slow erosion. The kind that happens when you overdraw not just accounts, but relationships. One night I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside, a family photo. Thanksgiving maybe 5 years ago. Jason's handwriting on the back. "We were good once." I placed it in the drawer beside Paul's flannel shirt. Because even ruins deserve a quiet place to rest, but they do not get to rise again on stolen ground. Britt had always been composed, elegant, poised, photogenic in that effortless way that makes country club newsletters and Christmas cards look curated by God himself. But pressure reveals the cracks even in marble. She began to post cryptic quotes online about betrayal, about boundaries, about the weight of other people's mistakes. Her smile in photos grew tight. Her tone in the group chat became clipped, then vanished altogether. I received a forwarded email from Carolyn at church. "Did you see this?" Attached was the flyer for a silent auction Britt had chaired for years. Her name was notably absent. Later that week, I spotted her at the grocery store. She didn't see me at first. She was hunched over the self-checkout removing items from her cart. Avocados, a wedge of brie, a bouquet of peonies. Her card declined. Twice. I turned away before she noticed. At home, I brewed tea and didn't say a word. Tyler called the next day. "They're fighting. A lot," he said. "She doesn't like uncertainty," I said. "No," he replied. "She doesn't like losing." According to Marisol, who knew someone in city planning, Britt had been quietly trying to secure a consulting deal on behalf of Jason's firm. The deal was dead. So was her leverage. That weekend she arrived at my house. Alone. No makeup, no performance. Just Britt in a sweatshirt and jeans that didn't quite fit. "I thought you loved being part of our family," she said, voice trembling. "I did," I answered, until I realized I was the only one treating it like something sacred. Her eyes filled, but no tears fell. "I never wanted to hurt you. You didn't have to," I said. "You just had to help him." She nodded slowly, then turned and walked away. I didn't watch her go. Some endings are too small for fanfare. They just dissolve, like sugar and tea, quiet, irretrievable, and completely, utterly final. It was Tyler who broke the silence. He came by unannounced hands buried in his hoodie, eyes low, like a boy who'd lost his place in line. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. I stepped aside. He didn't sit, just hovered in the doorway like a shadow that wasn't sure it belonged. "Jason's blaming me," he said. "Said I should have been the one to talk sense into you. Said I let this happen." I didn't respond. "He's unraveling. Britt's threatening to take the kids to her sister's. He thinks I sided with you." "And did you?" I asked. He looked up, then startled, as if no one had asked him that directly. "I don't know," he said finally. "Maybe I should have." The brothers weren't speaking. That much I'd already gathered from the gaps in communication, the sudden silence in our family group text. No more weekend updates, no more shared photos. Just absence. Jason had always been the strategist, Tyler the buffer. But buffers wear down. "He says I never contribute," Tyler said bitterly. "That I coast, that I'm not pulling my weight." I raised an eyebrow. "And are you?" He laughed, hollow. I was, just not the way he measures it. They had built their entire adult dynamic on the idea that Jason led and Tyler followed. But when the plan failed, Jason needed someone to blame. And Tyler? Tyler had no armor left. "You know," he said quietly, "you're the only person who ever asked me what I actually wanted. And what did you want?" He paused, swallowed. "Peace." He left not long after. Said he needed to clear his head. I didn't press him. Sometimes silence is a gift. That night I passed the boys' old room, the twin beds long gone, replaced by storage bins and boxes of old Christmas lights. But I still saw them there, laughing, bickering. Tyler with a sketch pad, Jason with a flashlight under the covers, drawing plans for a treehouse. Somewhere along the way, that closeness had hardened into roles. Leader, follower. Now just two men shouting across a chasm neither knew how to bridge. And I, the ghost they thought they'd buried, was the only one still standing on solid ground. They arrived together, late afternoon, no warning, no smiles. Jason wore his usual blazer, but it hung looser now. Britt had sunglasses on, though the sun had already dipped behind the pines. They didn't park in the driveway. They parked on the street like guests unsure they were welcome. I watched them from the porch, cup of tea in hand. They stood at the bottom of the steps for a beat too long, then climbed stiff and slow. "Can we come in?" Jason asked. "No," I said, "but we can talk here." Britt shifted. Jason cleared his throat. "We'd like to revisit the conversation," he said carefully. "Which one?" He blinked. "The house. The future. All of it." I said nothing. "We acted rashly," Britt added. "We misjudged." And Jason looked away. "And we're asking you to reconsider, to help us reset. You mean clean up the mess?" He flinched. Britt took off her sunglasses then. Her eyes were tired. "We thought you'd be okay with it, that you'd want to be taken care of." I looked at her, really looked. "Taken care of," I repeated. "That's not what I meant. But it is what you did." Jason took a step forward. "We're not here to argue. We just want to find a path forward." "Did it ever occur to either of you," I said slowly, "that maybe I already have silence?" I set my tea down. "I have no intention of selling the house. The land stays in trust. I've updated the county. I've filed everything. It's over." But Jason started. "It's over." Britt swallowed. "What about the family?" I tilted my head. "That's up to you. I'm still here. I've always been here. But I won't disappear to make you feel better about your choices." Jason's face crumpled just for a second. A flash of the little boy who scraped his knee and looked to me for rescue. Then it was gone. They left without another word. No hugs, no promises. Just two figures retreating down a path they once thought they owned. And me standing in the doorway of the house they thought they could take, holding the one thing they never counted on, myself. The first listing hit the market 2 weeks later. Jason's second property, an investment townhouse outside Charlotte. Staged photos, motivated seller caption price, slashed twice within the first week. I didn't look it up on purpose. It came up on my feed. One of those targeted ads that don't realize they're revealing more than they should. Britt's car went next, then the beach membership. Then a sudden announcement in the family group chat. Britt was downsizing her business commitments to focus on family. No one replied. Tyler texted me privately. He's liquidating. Quietly. Won't talk to anyone. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood caring doesn't mean carrying. They had built a future on borrowed comfort on the assumption that I would bend, then vanish. And now they were learning how expensive silence could be. One afternoon, I stopped by Marisol's garden. She handed me a basket of mint and said, "You hear about the fire sale?" I nodded. "Funny thing about men like Jason," she said. "They never notice the rope tightening until it's wrapped around their own ambition." I smiled, but it didn't feel cruel. It felt finished. At home, I made tea with the mint, sat on the back porch, watched the light filter through the trees on that acre no one believed in. The land was still mine. The house still stood. And somewhere out there, Jason was learning one sale, one compromise, one lost veneer at a time, that not all power can be bought or inherited. Some power is reclaimed by slow hands, by quiet choices, by mothers who refuse to be written out of their own story. And this time, there would be no edits, no deals, no compromises, just the truth, and the cost of underestimating it. It was Tyler who returned first. Not for negotiation, not for pity, just for coffee. He showed up on a Sunday morning, no fanfare. Jeans, hoodie, a box of donuts in one hand and in the other a folded sketch pad. "I thought you might still drink it black," he said. "I do." We sat on the porch. No talk of Jason, no talk of real estate or trust funds, just the wind in the trees and two mugs between us. After a while, he opened the sketch pad. Landscapes, some rough, some hauntingly good. One of the house drawn from memory. "I haven't drawn in a long time," he said. "Why now?" He shrugged. "Because it's mine." That one sentence held more clarity than all his years of following Jason's lead. "I'm thinking of leaving Charlotte," he said. "Maybe Asheville, somewhere quieter. For good? For me." I nodded. "You don't need my permission." He looked out over the yard. "I know. But I wanted your blessing." And he had it, because this wasn't a son begging for forgiveness. It was a man reclaiming his shape. He helped me trim the hedges that afternoon, carried boxes down from the attic, found an old photo album, and flipped through it slowly, as if trying to piece together a life he'd half forgotten. At dusk, he stood at the edge of the acre, the same spot where Paul used to mow, where Jason once tried to build a treehouse and gave up halfway. Tyler didn't say anything. He just stood there, eyes soft, hands in his pockets. Then he turned to me and said, "Whatever happens with him, I'm done chasing approval." It wasn't a declaration. It was an emancipation. Not from me, but from the roles we'd all been stuck in for far too long. When he left that evening, he hugged me tighter than he had in years, not as a son asking to be mothered, but as a man finally choosing who he wanted to be. Jason didn't come back. Not with papers, not with pleas, not with fury or flowers, just silence. It was the first time in his life he didn't fight to control the narrative. No spin, no pivot, just absence thick as fog. I heard from Britt once an email, short, sterile. "We've decided to spend some time apart. Jason's moved into a rental downtown. The kids are with me." There was no apology, just a signature. I didn't respond. Because there's nothing left to say to people who only value you when they think you can be used. According to Tyler, Jason had withdrawn from most of his firm's public work. Rumors circulated burnout, personal issues, financial missteps. But no one dared say the word failure. Men like Jason are never labeled failures, just in transition. Still, the silence told the truth. He no longer sent updates, no photos of the grandkids, no check-ins, not even performative ones. He had vanished, but not out of punishment, out of pride. I saw it coming. Pride is a house with no doors. Once you're inside, there's nowhere to go but down. The last time I heard his voice, it was a voicemail. Just 6 words. I hope you're proud of this. I didn't save it, because the answer is yes, I am proud, not of what he lost, but of what I reclaimed. My space, my silence, my name. The irony is, in the end, I didn't need to isolate Jason. He did it to himself. I simply stopped cushioning the fall, and when the dust settled, I was still standing, not broken, just whole in a way I hadn't been for decades. Sometimes justice doesn't look like gavel strikes or grand speeches. Sometimes it's just the quiet emptiness left behind by people who thought they were indispensable. And the woman they once underestimated watching from her porch, surrounded by everything they never truly saw. Peace didn't come all at once. It came in moments, in soft, quiet folds, like clean laundry still warm from the dryer. It came in the sound of birds nesting in the eastern trees, in the way the porch swing no longer creaked like a question, in how my morning coffee, still black, tasted like something earned, not endured. The house was still the same wallpaper in the hallway, same dent in the stair rail where Jason once launched a toy truck too hard, but it felt different. It felt returned, not reclaimed, not conquered, just mine again. I planted rosemary near the mailbox, painted the shed a soft gray, took down the old Christmas lights from the attic that hadn't been used in years. There was no audience, no applause, only presence. I let the acre grow wild in some places, groomed in others. I didn't try to control it all. I just walked the perimeter like a friend, not a warden. Carl came by once a week to check on the soil. He brought seed packets and weather forecasts and stories about his grandkids. We rarely talked about the past. He never asked what happened with Jason. That was the thing about Carl. He knew when silence wasn't emptiness, but space. Tyler called more often. Sometimes he sent sketches. Once he mailed me a watercolor of the porch sunlight caught on the wood-grain shadows of leaves dancing across the siding. I framed it, hung it above the mantel. For Thanksgiving, I made a small roast, one place setting, a candle, my own grace before the meal. I am here, I whispered, still here. The phone didn't ring. There were no visitors, and yet I didn't feel alone. The clearing had come, not because I chased it, but because I stopped letting the storm tell my story. I had weathered it. And in the quiet that followed, I finally heard the only voice that had been missing all along. My own. I didn't write it out of anger. I wrote it because I needed to finish the page. It wasn't long, just 3 paragraphs. Typed, not handwritten. My script carries too much emotion. I needed this to be still. I began simply, Jason. I received your voicemail. I've thought about it. No accusation, no bitterness, just truth, measured and quiet. I told him that I had chosen to stay in the house not because I was clinging to the past, but because I had finally made peace with it. That the land he once dismissed had become a sanctuary, not a battlefield. That he didn't need to understand it, just respect it. I told him I didn't hold hate, but I did hold memory. And memory, I had learned, is not a weapon. It's a boundary, and some boundaries aren't meant to be crossed, not even by family. I ended the letter with this: you once asked if I was proud of what I'd done. I am. Not because it hurt you, but because for the first time it didn't hurt me. I folded it slowly, slipped it into an envelope. No return address. I didn't mail it right away. I let it sit on the mantel for 3 days, next to the watercolor Tyler sent and a small porcelain dish where I kept old buttons. On the 4th day, I walked to the post office. I dropped it in the box without ceremony. Then I bought a stamp with a cardinal on it, bright red, Winterbird. At home, I placed that stamp on the inside of my recipe cabinet right above Paul's old pancake notes. A quiet marker, not of victory, but of release. Jason may never reply. He may never visit. And still the letter was not for him. It was for me. Because sometimes the most radical thing a woman can do is tell the truth and then let it go. The first frost came early. I woke to a field of silver, every blade of grass edged in light, every branch dusted in cold lace. The air was still. Even the birds seemed to pause. Most people wait until spring to plant. But I've learned something about growth. It doesn't ask permission from the seasons. So that morning, I pulled on my gloves, stepped into the garden, and dug. Not with urgency. Not to prove anything. Just because the soil was still mine. I planted winter kale, garlic, a few stubborn pansies that don't know how to quit. Carl had given me a bag of bulbs, tulips, and daffodils. "Plant them deep," he said. "Trust they'll remember the light." So I did. Each bulb a quiet hope. Each row a sentence in a language only the earth and I understood. Later, I made soup, roasted carrots, a warm loaf of bread. I ate alone but not lonely. The house no longer echoed. It hummed, with memory, with presence, with breath. I hung Tyler's newest sketch in the hallway, a simple line drawing of a single tree, leaves falling in slow motion. There was no frame, just tape and intention. At dusk, I lit a candle in the window, not because I expected visitors, but because the act of lighting it reminded me that I am here, alive, rooted, like those bulbs under the frost waiting, not for anyone else, but for the sun, for the thaw, for the moment I bloom not to be seen but because I can. This I realized is what freedom feels like, not loud, not grand, but steady and growing, even in winter. It was a Saturday afternoon when I heard the knock, soft, hesitant, the kind that doesn't expect an answer. When I opened the door, she was standing there, blonde braid down her back, cheeks pink from the cold, hands stuffed in a too-big sweatshirt. "Hi," she said. "I think I'm your granddaughter." It was Ellie, Jason's oldest. I hadn't seen her in almost 2 years. Last time she was buried in screens, distracted, distant. Now she looked straight at me. "I asked Dad if I could come," she said quickly. "He said it was up to me." I stepped aside. "Then I'm glad you did." We sat at the kitchen table. She picked at a muffin. I made cocoa the way I used to, too many marshmallows, just enough cinnamon. "I found the old photo albums," she said, "in the garage. No one told me you used to quilt." I smiled. "I used to do a lot of things." She pulled something from her backpack. "A scarf? Crooked stitches? Uneven rows?" "I tried," she said. "I watched videos, but it's harder than it looks." I held it gently. "It's beautiful." She beamed, the way children do when they're seen without evaluation. We talked about school, about how she liked art but didn't tell her mom because it's not practical, about how sometimes she missed this house but wasn't sure why. "Maybe it's the swing," she said. It squeaked different. Before she left, she hugged me. Not a stiff, obligatory squeeze, but a real one. "I don't know everything that happened," she said softly, "but I'm glad you're still here. So was I." After she left, I sat on the porch for a long while, the scarf still in my lap. It wasn't perfect, but it was stitched with intention, and that I realized is how healing begins, one visit, one thread, one stitch at a time. The acre had thawed. What once was brittle and frostbitten now pulsed with early green, shoots pushing through the soil, buds tight on the tips of branches. The land had not forgotten. Neither had I. I walked it slowly that morning, boots sinking just enough to remind me this earth was alive. I carried a journal, the one Carl gave me, leather-bound with pages still blank in the back. I paused where the sycamore used to stand. Only a stump remained now, but even that had softened moss curling along its edge like lace. Paul had called this place our buffer. Now it felt more like a canvas. I took out a pencil, began to sketch, not perfectly, not like Tyler, but enough. A small amphitheater, raised garden beds, a reading bench under the old oak. Not for profit, not for development, for community, for memory. For women like me who had been told their usefulness ended when their children no longer needed casseroles and calendar reminders. I called Marisol that afternoon. Would the garden club be interested in a new space? She didn't hesitate, always. Carl agreed to help map it. Tyler offered to design signage. Ellie wanted to paint birdhouses. It was slow work, gentle work. but it stitched the torn spaces between what had been taken and what could be given. I didn't name the project after myself. I named it after my mother, and her mother, and the women before them, the ones who endured, the ones who didn't get to write letters or hold deeds or sit at zoning meetings, but who knew with aching clarity how to plant something that would last. The land remembered them. Now it would remember me. Not because I fought for control, but because I stayed long enough to reclaim care. And in the quiet rise of spring, something finally bloomed that no one could take a legacy I chose. Rooted, tended, and entirely mine. We built the bench on a Thursday. Carl brought the wood, Tyler brought the tools. Ellie brought sandwiches, though most of hers went to the squirrels. It wasn't fancy. Just cedar slats curved slightly to cradle a tired back. No plaque, no inscription, just a place to rest. We placed it under the oak, the same tree Paul used to nap under during summers, the same one Jason once tried to cut back because it blocked too much light. Now it cast shade with quiet authority. I sat there alone the next morning. The garden hummed. Somewhere nearby, a robin sang in that scattered rhythm that makes you pause. I brought nothing with me. No journal, no plan, just breath. And for the first time in a long, long while, I didn't feel the need to defend my space. I thought of Paul, how he used to hum when he worked with his hands, how he'd always let the boys hammer one nail, then make them watch him do 10 more. He would have loved this bench. I thought of Jason, not with anger, just with truth, that he was a boy who became a man before learning how to grieve, that his ambition was a shield, that he may never sit here under this tree beside me, and that I was finally okay with that. The ache was still there, but it no longer dictated the story. Grief, I've learned, is like a riverbank. It changes shape, it recedes, it returns, but you can learn to sit beside it. You can learn to plant things that bloom anyway. I stayed on the bench until the sun crested noon. Then I stood stretched and whispered more to the tree than to the wind, "I'm still here." And the leaves rustled back, as if they'd never doubted it. The peace didn't announce itself. It settled in slowly, like mist at dawn, not loud, not triumphant, just present. I felt it in the way I moved through the house, no longer out of habit but choice. I opened windows, even when it was cold, just to feel the air move. I let music play in the kitchen, old records crackling with memory. There were days I didn't speak to anyone, and still I didn't feel alone. I read again, books I used to love before laundry lists and PTA meetings took their place. I underlined phrases that stirred something, wrote notes in the margins just for me. One morning I baked a pie, not for guests, not for holidays, just because I wanted the house to smell like cinnamon. The crust burned a little. I didn't mind. I sat at the table with a slice and a mug of black coffee, the same table where deals had been plotted behind my back, the same table where Jason once scolded Tyler for spilling juice. Now it was just a table, a place to sit, a place to begin. I kept Ellie's scarf on the coat rack even as spring warmed the air. Its crooked edges made me smile. Tyler mailed a sketch every few weeks. One of them was just a series of hands, some holding tools, some clasped, one resting on an open book. "I think hands tell the truth," he wrote in the corner. He was right. The house, the land, the silence, they all held me, not as a burden, but as a witness, to everything I had carried, to everything I had let go. One night I lit a single candle before bed, not for grief, not for memory, but for grace, for having made it through. And as the flame flickered gently in the dark, I whispered, "This is enough." And I meant it. For the first time in decades, I meant it. And so our protagonist found peace. But it leaves us with a big question: is forgiveness always the answer? Or does justice sometimes require decisive action? I'm genuinely curious to hear your thoughts on the biggest lesson from this story. Share them in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, show your support with a like, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next one. Our next story is truly unforgettable. Click on it right here on the screen. Thank you for being part of our community.